let's get the more medium-term and the longer-term view in, especially ahead of the big binary event tomorrow. Pratik Gupta, head of Equities at Deutsche Bank India, joins us actually from the sidelines of their Deutsche Bank Annual India Conference. Pratik, in a minute I'll ask you about your conference itself, but basically what is the investor mood ahead of the budget? Is it that only the domestic traders in the investment community is going with a lot of hopes, or are foreign investors also expecting a lot from the budget?
Well, actually, firstly, our conference begins next week, but as you rightly, I think, alluded to, the foreign investors we speak to, especially the longer-term ones, they always get amused by all the hype around the Indian budget. And frankly, for them, they're looking more at the longer-term picture, the actual day-to-day reform-making process, and in particular, some of these critical legislations which are pending in Parliament. That's really the bigger picture they're focused on. The budget, however, is going to be an important policy statement, and I would say that over the last few days and last few weeks, expectations have started coming off slightly, especially when you go around asking investors as to what specifically are the big bang measures that you'd expect. A lot of folks struggle to answer that. So I think the general expectation is that this budget will be a growth-oriented budget in the form of higher public spendings like what we saw in the railway budget. But as such, no one's expecting something dramatic. Everyone knows that the fiscal leeway is somewhat limited, so to that extent there's only so much one can do with innovative financing. But you know, like you alluded to, I think expectations have come off slightly, and as people realize that there's not so much a budget alone can do, you actually need other things also to go along with the union budget.
Okay, Pratik, good morning. Just hold on for a tad bit. There's some news flow coming in on your screen. This is a CNBC TV18 exclusive where we understand that IDFC Alternatives is eyeing ONGC's thermal plant. It's eyeing a 23.5% stake in ONGC's Tripura Power Company, which is OTPC, which is an SPV promoted by ONGC, ILNFS and Government of Tripura. And IDFC has emerged as the highest bidder for that plant. So we'll get more details to that in a bit, but just keep your eye out on that particular news flow. Pratik, hi, good morning. You have a very impressive lineup at your conference next week, and some of the speakers include names like Aditya Puri, Chanda Kochar, Arundhati Bhattacharya, etc. From the banking perspective itself, what is the expectation this time around from the budget in terms of bank capitalization, and how would you approach this sector as a whole?
Firstly, just a quick correction on we're not having a banking panel. Instead, we have Arundhati Bhattacharya, the SBI chairperson, doing a keynote session. We think that's actually very, very critical. As you pointed out, the banking sector, especially the public sector banks, are very, very critical to the economy going forward, and most of them do need a lot of capital. So one of the things we would expect in the budget is much higher allocation for the capital requirements of the banking sector, especially some of the weaker banks. As you know, they probably will be unable to raise equity from the markets, and they will need a lot of budgetary support. So that's one big thing which we're looking forward to in the budget. The other aspect, obviously, on the banking sector, which is going to be affected by the overall economy, is the growth plans, in terms of driving new capex, in terms of reviving the stalled projects, things like the legislation pending in Parliament, like the Land Acquisition Act, etc. So I would argue that these sort of things are going to be far more important. And obviously, of course, I forgot, we have at Deutsche Bank, we're expecting RBI to continue cutting rates further. So the transmission of those rates is going to be very important to watch, especially in this case, as I mentioned, we have SBI chairman speaking at our conference to try and figure out as to when SBI will start cutting its lending rates. That's going to be very important for the outlook for the entire banking sector. Clearly, other private banks will most likely follow SBI's lead over there.
Okay. Pratik, it's very clear from the union budget that the government is serious about its own investment pump priming, if you please. 4.2 lakh crore, 42,000 crore comes from the budget as support to the railways compared to 32,000 crores last time, a good 30% increase. But this fantastic 50% increase in capex which the railways have announced is kind of left hanging in terms of one last piece of 17,000 crore, and that's a good 26% of what they are of their layout. that is left to something like an infra fund, which would obviously, one expects that, they'll find the seed capital to get some debt, perhaps, some kind of a contingent liability. That is the, vehicle they appear to be using to square the circle, as it were. If a similar, arrangement is announced in the union budget tomorrow, a grand capex plan of maybe 6 lakh crore or something, or 7 lakh crore, and the last 2 lakh crore coming in the form of a contingent liability through an instrument like that, will you buy it?
I think if the intent is there, I think obviously the government needs to move further in that direction in terms of working with the multilateral agencies. You need to get foreign government FDI, for example, sovereign funds, etc. There is a lot of appetite for investing in Indian projects. So if you have the right structure, the right tax mechanisms, etc., I think we will see demand. You're right to be skeptical at this stage because we've not seen this happen in the past. But which is why we think actually this is a very innovative, very, sort of almost like a landmark step forward in terms of trying to work within your fiscal constraints to leverage your limited equity that you have to attract this sort of financing. So, as you said, I think most people are skeptical right now, but we think this is how it will get done. This is how infrastructure projects are financed globally the world over. And this, obviously, our domestic capital market is not deep enough to provide that kind of long-term capital. So, while there will be skepticism, but we think it can get done.
Okay, just one question on how to approach the markets now, Pratik. If there is no major disappointment in the budget tomorrow, then do you see higher FII participation in the Indian markets? Will India continue to remain one of the best spots in the emerging market basket?
We think so, because the global macro environment is still very much in favor of India, given the lower commodity prices, the fact that there's a lot of liquidity sloshing around with the ECB also going on a QE path. And in India, the only question is the pace of recovery or acceleration of the economic growth. I would say the bigger issue, more than the budget, once again, is really how the government succeeds in Parliament and getting some of its critical legislation passed and getting past the opposition in terms of various issues. Otherwise, that will simply delay these bills for perhaps another year or so. But in general, most investors we speak to internationally are very pleased with the progress that India is making, and which is why we haven't seen a deep correction in the market so far, despite earnings continuing to disappoint. And in fact, our expectation is that even the March quarter may not see a pickup in earnings. The earnings upgrade cycle may still be another 2 or 3 quarters away. But despite that, we are seeing foreign investors getting more convinced about the longer-term story. If I may just add, at our conference itself, we have a lot of foreign investors coming through, and even based on conversations over the last few months, there is gradually growing conviction and belief that this government means business. You will see a pickup in the economic recovery. The only debate is on the pace of the recovery and also to what extent these things are priced in.
Fair point. Good to hear that. Is it priced in? We will, of course, touch base with you at the conference yet again to check what the consensus view is after the budget. Thank you very much, Pratik Gupta, for joining us, and have a great conference starting Monday.